Collusion in the critical paradigm and social justice education, the silence that sustains power. 1. Conceptualizing collusion, beyond complicity. In critical theory, collusion refers to the active or passive participation, conscious or unconscious, in systems, practices, or ideologies that perpetuate oppression, inequality, or dominant power structures. While complicity tends to imply a more passive or unintentional involvement, collusion points to a deeper entanglement with power, where individuals or institutions benefit from, protect, or even rationalize unjust structures. It can manifest through silence, inaction, endorsement, or selective ignorance, even among those who publicly advocate for equity. Collusion is the quiet pact with injustice. The decision to look away when looking deeper would demand moral courage. 2. The nature of collusion in critical research. In the critical research paradigm, collusion is not a peripheral concern, it is central to understanding how hegemony is maintained. Oppressive systems rarely survive on violence alone. They rely on the collusion of the governed, the indifference of institutions, and the moral evasions of privilege. Ontologically, collusion reveals that structures of oppression, for example, racism, patriarchy, classism, are reproduced through social practice, not just imposed from above. B. Epistemologically, it critiques how knowledge systems and educational institutions may collude with dominant ideologies, presenting biased or exclusionary content as objective or universal. C. Methodologically, it urges researchers to confront their own positionality, the interests they serve, and the voices they silence or amplify in the research process. 3. Expressions of collusion in education and society. Collusion takes many forms, often subtle, normalized, or hidden behind the language of professionalism, neutrality, or tradition. In education and research, it can be observed in A. Curriculum and pedagogy, omitting marginalized histories, for example, indigenous knowledge, Black intellectual thought. Teaching content that reinforces colonial, patriarchal, or neoliberal worldviews. Promoting neutral or objective approaches that fail to address power imbalances. B. Institutional culture. Upholding policies that favor dominant racial, linguistic, or gender groups under the guise of meritocracy. Silencing whistleblowers, students, or staff who challenge injustice. Rewarding those who conform and punishing those who resist. See research practices. Choosing topics that are institutionally safe but socially irrelevant. Ignoring or underreporting findings that might challenge powerful stakeholders. Gatekeeping publication spaces from transformative or indigenous scholarship. D. Leadership and governance. Turning a blind eye to discrimination or abuse to maintain harmony or reputation. Making equity a strategic goal but not a funded priority. Using symbolic gestures, for example, heritage months, slogans to avoid structural reform. 4. Collusion and the internalization of oppression. Collusion also operates within the oppressed. The internalization of hegemonic norms can lead individuals to police each other, deny their own worth, or reject alternative worldviews. In Freirean terms, this is the fear of freedom, a condition where the oppressed adopt the oppressor's logic as their own. Examples include women who shame other women for rejecting domestic roles, Black learners who view their own language or heritage as inferior, working-class students who ridicule peers for talking politics or critiquing capitalism. Here, collusion becomes a psychological and cultural phenomenon, an outcome of deep structural violence and prolonged disempowerment. 5. The role of social justice education, interrupting collusion. Social justice education must go beyond raising awareness of injustice. It must also disrupt collusion, both systemic and personal. This involves consciousness raising, helping learners and educators identify how they may be unknowingly participating in systems of domination. This includes unlearning internalized racism, sexism, elitism, and ableism. Critical reflexivity, encouraging honest, uncomfortable reflection about positionality, privilege, and the consequences of silence. Critical pedagogy invites educators to examine how their own classroom practices may reinforce or challenge systemic inequity. Dialogic engagement, facilitating spaces where students and communities speak back to power, share lived experiences, and co-create knowledge. This transforms the classroom from a site of transmission to one of critical transformation. Structural change, pushing for actual changes in policy, representation, resource distribution, and institutional culture, not just surface-level equity initiatives. 6. From collusion to resistance. The antidote to collusion is not guilt, it is ethical accountability. Recognizing collusion is not about blaming individuals, but about naming the systemic patterns that require moral clarity and courageous disruption. In research, this might mean choosing topics that center marginalized communities, sharing authorship and voice with participants, refusing funding or partnerships that compromise ethical integrity, naming the ideological assumptions that shape inquiry. In education, this means teaching difficult truths, rewriting curricula, speaking out when it is inconvenient, building solidarities across difference. Conclusion: unmasking the comfortable lie. Collusion is the silent agreement with power, the mirror that flatters but does not tell the truth. In critical research and social justice education, to name collusion is to take the first step toward freedom with responsibility. It is an act of intellectual honesty and moral courage, the refusal to be comfortable at the expense of justice. The challenge before us is not just to oppose injustice, but to withdraw our consent from it, interrupt its logics, and reimagine the world beyond it. Happy learning.